Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the Operations Coordinator for CFAO York. I would like to officially open the 20th session in our Climate Change Emergencies and Cultural Heritage Speaker Series, which is being presented in partnership with Heritage Ottawa and World Heritage Catalysis. I would like to begin today's session with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Tkaronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. And with this, I'd like to welcome our moderator, our speaker, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Bruno Genito. Dr. Genito is a professor at the University of Naples, L'Orientale, teaching Iranian art history and archaeology and Central Asian art and archaeology. Since 2013, he has served as the director of Series Mayor in the Department of Asia and Africa and the Mediterranean. Dr. Genito has also served as director of the Italian Archaeological Mission in Azerbaijan since 2016, the Italian Archaeological Mission in Uzbekistan since 2008, and served as the director of the Italian Archaeological Mission in Iran from 2003 to 2014, and also in Hungary from 1983 to 1997. He was also the vice director of the Italian Archaeological Mission in Turkmenistan from 1989 to 94. As of 2000, Dr. Genito has been a member of the advisory board of the journal Ancient Civilizations from Scythia to Siberia. In 2003, he became a member of the permanent liaison committee between European and Japanese archaeologists to facilitate archaeological research by non-nationals in Asia. Dr. Genito has several fields of interest, including Iranian archaeology from the Iron Age to the Islamic period, archaeology of Central Asia from the Iron Age to the early medieval time, and archaeology of nomadic steppes people from Iron Age to the early medieval time, archaeology of the Silk Roads, and archaeology of the early medieval period in the Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Dr. Genito, thank you very much for moderating today's session and for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Good evening or good afternoon to everybody. This is the Climate Change Emergency and Cultural Heritage Speaker Series Session 20, organized by the York Chiefel University, UNITAR, and from the Heritage Ottawa Patrimoine from Canada. Anyway, today we have guest Dr. Matthias Ripp, and I'm very shortly present him, who is a senior heritage manager with a background in historical geography, coordinator of the heritage site, the Old Town of Regensburg, with the Stadt Mafo, and adjunct professor of Vauxhall University, Hyderabad. He has published a number of books and peer-review articles on heritage management, urban resilience, heritage-based urban development, urban transformation, and heritage interpretation, and is active in numerous networks such as Heritage Europe and ICOMOS. He coordinated the EU Euro Heritage as Opportunity project and chairs the UNESCO World Heritage Working Group and on historical city centers in the German Association of Cities. Since November 2011, he has also been regional coordinator for the Northwest European and North American region of the Organization of World Heritage Cities, and has worked as a consultant and expert for various governments, the European Commission, and entities like the Getty Institute. He enjoys teaching at several universities and works also as a trainer, facilitator, and coach. So, Dr. Ripp, I finished your presentation, so the voice is on you. And I think you have about 45 minutes approximately, right? And so after that, we will ask for some questions, some some comments to your speech, and you will very kindly answer to them. Thank you very much. Please, you can start.
Thank you, Professor Genito, for the fantastic introduction, and thank you to the invitation for this speaker series. So let me just share my screen, and then we try to go in medias res.
Yes.
So it works with the screen sharing? Just a quick note to let me know. Yeah, okay, great.
Yes, please.
So the big new term that everyone is talking about is resilience today. And is it only a new buzzword? Is it the next big thing after sustainability? Is it the same as sustainability? What do we do with it? Is it only adaptation qualities of places, or what is it really? How can we work with it? And what is the relation between sustainability, and especially how can we use it in heritage management? That's a little bit the background of my presentation today, and it is based on a paper that last year we published together with two colleagues, one from Fraunhofer Institute and another colleague from Tecnalia in Spain. And the idea was to make a medium-term explanation, definition of resilience that we can use in urban planning and heritage management. So a lot of things to talk about. I try to keep it brief, and I love questions, so please don't be shy and put in the comments or speak up after I've finished. So first of all, what is our understanding of heritage today? It is much more than things, it's much more than buildings, it's much more than documents. Today we have the idea that heritage is a system that includes tangible and intangible things. And of course, people, values, processes are also part of the system. I will get to this point in a minute and explain in detail what in my mind makes this heritage system. And if you want to read about it under the key term new heritage approaches, there's a whole new movement shaping that is going into a systemic dimension of heritage. So the ultimate purpose maybe often is to increase the quality of life of communities and users. And for this, we need some kind of management, coordination, whatever. And often the resilience concepts that we have, they are either oversimplified. So people explain it, oh, it's just adaptation quality. No, it's not. It's more complicated, but it's also not overly complicated that we cannot use it. So we thought we need something on the medium level of detail. And why do we need it? Because when we work with heritage, either to protect it or to use it for sustainable development, we have to work in a cross-sectoral way. For all of you who have ever worked on the urban level, you know that this is complicated, and it's the biggest barrier is the sectoral organization of local governments usually. So how can urban resilience be really, can it be really used in urban heritage management? So we used two examples, two big European projects, two Horizon 2020 projects. Their names were Shelter and Arch, and you will learn about them more in a minute. So first of all, what is relating resilience and cultural heritage? They can form a relation because resilience has a strong systemic core. It's systemic thinking. It's understanding the things as systems. We will also see in a minute. And heritage, as I said before, can also be understood or is understood more and more looking beyond objects, looking beyond physical qualities, looking beyond buildings, and acknowledging that people have a role, processes are happening, intangible, tangible documents. So all this is what I call heritage systems. So this, what I call systemic approach, is basically the consideration of a dynamic, complex, and non-linear connections between different elements of the systems. Systems are complex, they are unpredictable. For many people, they are overwhelming. So when we want to govern the system, we must use multidisciplinary approaches and really go beyond usual unidisciplinary approaches that we still usually find in all the universities with very little exceptions. So other theoretical approaches to cultural heritage are based more in linear thinking. When you think of traditional preservation efforts or conservation efforts, it's recently we talk about buildings like the one that you see on the slide, and we talk about material, about qualities, about keeping the fabric as original as it was. We talk about authenticity, but we don't often acknowledge that this building is part of a larger system. And this system has to do with how it is used, how it is valued, how it is documented, and maybe even how it is destroyed. So the term resilience can be traced back to the 15th century. So it was a kind of juridical term for the restoration of an original legal situation. So here you have this quality of getting something back that is lost into its original shape. And then it was used in the 19th century in relation with the durability of physical materials. And the idea was that some materials, when you change like the temperature or where it is in a liquid or outside, then it can get back into its original form. Then the concept was picked up by psychology in the 20th century, and it was used basically for humans. And first of all, it was for children coming from really difficult families. Actually, it was in North America, a lot of studies. And they found out that some of the children from very difficult backgrounds where you had misuse and poverty, whatever, but some of these children made a career and they were really successful in life. And not only in terms of career, but also in terms of social life, whatever. So they looked, what is special about these children? What is the difference that we can find in these children than from many, many other children that are not doing so well? So resilience is a systemic concept because it is inseparable from the context. You cannot create resilience without acknowledging the things around something that you look at. That is, in a nutshell, the systemic idea of resilience. It has been used also a lot in biology, for example, by Holling. It's a famous author that published a lot, and it was always rooted in systems. So this is very important to keep into our minds. And when it has been transferred to other contexts, it has also been used in many other systems, like family systems, education systems, but also in natural science, in soil systems, in social science, in communities, in cities, etc. So recent publications have connected cultural heritage with resilience. I'm sure you all have came across some of those, and also sustainability. And many of those are focusing on disaster risk management, because obviously when we have more and more disasters, we are kind of desperate and we need new strategies and we need to find new ways. How can we adapt? How can we prepare? And then resilience in the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years became increasingly unpopular, and we see a steep rising number of publications in different scientific journals like Land, Sustainability, whatever. So viewing environments as socio-ecological systems, then we must acknowledge they are process dependent. So we must understand that everything is also a process. So we have the time dimension. It's not only that the system is complex with many elements, but at the same time, we have a time dimension, which makes it even more complex. So this is really impacting resilience enhancement. And is a total different thing from traditional linear approaches where you only take a small part of the reality, identify a single thing, for example, a historic window in a historic building, and then you only deal with this window and look at materials and how to make it exactly like it was. When you look at it from a systemic way, for example, if you look at this window, you could consider things like where's the location of the window, which direction, what is the heating system, is it good that the type of glass is really corresponding with the heating system that is used? So you would open up and have like a broader understanding about the context and all the relations that are related to these specific historic windows. So we're dealing with socio-ecological systems. And then we have often, in terms of resilience, we have specified and general aspects of resilience. So it is in a way, specified resilience can be understood. What most cities are doing today when they do resilience, or for example, the Stockholm 100 Resilient Cities program, 99% was climate resilience, okay? So it was looking at climate change and how does that affect, and maybe a little bit also disaster risk management, but that really only became popular in the last years. But other risks for society have not really been part of the resilience thing. They would be part if we really understood resilience in a more general way. What other risks do I mean? Obviously, war, disinformation, disease like COVID, etc. I mean, we have a lot of other risks, not only climate change. So specified resilience can be either more narrow than only looking at climate change when it comes to disaster risk management. Some of the resilience concepts even deal only with a single hazard. For example, heat. I guess in Toronto, that's also a thing in summer. So you have many more hot days. So if you would look only at the hot days and define a resilience concept without looking at all the other risks that are always there in parallel, you have a specified resilience concept, which in a way causes also a lot of problems because sometimes what you need to do for one risk is not the same thing that is good for another risk. So generalized resilience has more a long-term vision. It has a transformative capacity, and the idea is more to create, for example, resilient cities that can deal better with a number of different risks. And of course, it's a complex exercise. And specified resilience is really more looking at specific hazards or specific risks, be it flood, earthquakes, whatever. So in the ARCH project, they develop things like, for example, the resilience assessment dashboard, where you can have a look what risks are relevant in your city, or what are risks. I mean, some of the risks we don't know. Think of COVID. I mean, 6 years ago, no one had the idea that we have a big COVID coming toward us. So we can only work with scenarios, and the predictability is always limited when it comes to generalized risks. But in the ARCH project, they have created this resilience assessment dashboard that is really helping to get an overview. And a lot of cities are now doing disaster risk management in relation to cultural heritage. And the first step often is to get an understanding. What are the relevant risks? But still, even if we do it, usually we talk about 50% of the relevant risks, even when we have a broad approach. So sustainability and resilience. A lot of people mix it up. A lot of people think it's the same. No, 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 no. It's not. Sustainability is really coming from, it was popular in forest management in Germany in the 18th century, and the idea was really to keep something. So it's more the idea that after something is happening or a process is happening or something is built, in the end, you have the same amount of resources than before. Resilience is much more flexible because if something happens, it is targeting more about the adaptability. How can we deal with things? Even if we know that maybe in many cases, after something happens, we will not have exactly the same state as before. And going even further, some resilience concepts have the idea that when something is happening, like an earthquake, after the earthquake, we should be even better prepared for the next thing. So it has also a stronger dimension to improve something and make it more robust, while sustainability has really the idea to keep the resources. So in a way, when we look at it, I mean, I'm not sure if you have read papers about how sustainability is measured and things like that. The level of complexity can already be high, but compared to resilience, I would call it fair, because we are dealing with a limited number of parameters. So this is basically the difference between the two concepts. And the question what many people ask is, okay, what shall we do? Shall we forget about sustainability and do only resilience? I think we need both, but we need them in different ways. And resilience is maybe a little bit more what we need in this time where everything is changing so fast, and the risk in terms of the impact and in terms of the changing is accelerating so rapidly. So maybe it's a little bit shifting from sustainability to resilience, but we can of course not forget about sustainability because the resources of planet Earth are very limited. So both concepts in a way guide us to a holistic approach, because we must look beyond things, we must look at processes, we must look at life cycle, for example, we must look at circular economy things. So both help us in a way to broaden up a little bit our understanding from very specific considerations, for example, of listed buildings. So like resilience, also the concept of cultural heritage management has evolved. I said this a few times, and just for you to put it very briefly, I mean, when the preservation movement started in the 19th century, it was about cathedrals and castles, okay? So it was single buildings. Then in the middle of the 20th century, we had ensembles, and suddenly we had buildings that were part of a listing scheme that it's by itself were not so valuable, but they were part of the ensemble because we expanded the idea. And then in 2011, we had the recommendation for historic urban landscape that, based on works of urban morphologists like Conzen, for example, they included functions and layers, which was quite a revolution because it was an important step to understand heritage really in a systemic way. It is, for example, about few connections from the city to the countryside. It is about how the buildings have been used or are still used or not. Think of churches, for example. So it's adding new layers, and it's giving a more complex understanding of cultural heritage. And this is much more adaptable to resilience, because we have resilience as a systemic concept and we have urban heritage also in a systemic way. So these two are much more compatible, as if we only look at listed buildings and only follow the we need to protect and save and they cannot be destroyed narrative. That is still so prevalent. So heritage is now recognized as a social and political construct. I mean, I have a lot of discussions with preservationists, for example, from ICOMOS about this, because I often say very provocative, without people, there is no heritage. And then we have a lot of debate about intrinsic values. Something has a value of its own. There are different ideas on this. We have the Faro Convention that basically says without people, we don't have anything that we can call heritage. So it's a very controversial point of view. I personally think that at the end of the day, everything we do for people and not for stones. So the heritage sector has evolved. We have a more complex understanding of cultural heritage. There has been a shift from a sectorial, one-dimensional approach, basically physical things, what Laura Jane Smith calls the authorized heritage dialogue, if you're familiar with her. And now it's more, we see more and more research where different disciplines work together. We see mixed method research using qualitative and quantitative approaches, and they all do the same thing. They get a more broad understanding of the subject, and this opens up a lot of possibilities. So together with these complex historic environments and systems, of course, when people have a stronger role, we talk about things like participation, we talk about things like adaptive reuse, heritage management, meaning making, heritage interpretation. We have a shift to a little bit more social aspects also related to cultural heritage, while in the 1970s or 80s, they were almost non-existent. I mean, they were the smallest beginnings, but today it's like we have a big wave of research. So when we look at cultural heritage, we can understand it in different ways. I mean, we can understand it as a sector. Heritage is a separate field, and part of this sector are preservationists, people working in ministries, doing policies, but also the stonemason, for example. Then we have the idea to understand it factor-based. So heritage is a resource. It's one factor in a process, or vector-based. It's a foundation for sustainable development. If you want to learn more about this, Google the term vector and heritage and development, and you will find some good articles from the Netherlands that will go more into detail about this. So the core of it, what is the role of cultural heritage in resilience? And we have examined that cultural heritage is not only something that is to be protected, but it has a lot of other functions, and it also has a lot to contribute to resilience. And it can contribute to the way it is designed and constructed. It can contribute to the use of appropriate materials and aspects like repairability, for example. It can contribute to adaptive reuse in certain aspects of urban planning. And in the shelter project, they did a similar research, and they tried to get an idea what is the characteristic of resilience of heritage, and they found things like robustness, strength, adaptability, but also living with uncertainty, self-organization elements, and more social elements related to the system like diversity, variety, inclusiveness, etc., and intersectorality. I mean, this is what they found in this shelter project. So urban resilience in a way bridges theory and practice, but traditionally we have been focused almost exclusively on the physical fabric. And the idea was to keep the physical fabric. And if the physical fabric is restored or renovated, for example, after a disaster, then we are happy. And this has really changed with the new idea of urban heritage resilience. So to dig a little bit deeper into these resilience aspects of heritage, so when we talk about building resilience, we talk about structural security, traditional techniques, built environment, relationships. Cultural resilience is more understood as social inclusion, cultural identity, local knowledge. Social resilience is related to well-being, quality of life also, cultural natural connections. Governance resilience is more about partnerships, of really going out of your sector and out of your silo, doing interdisciplinary governance. And economic resilience is about local competitiveness, innovation, adaptability. And then we have environmental resilience, which is more related to biodiversity. Think of local parks, historic parks. And of course, this is also a very important aspect in relation to resilience, and especially climate resilience. So historical buildings, in the way they are designed, often contributes to resilience. How? When I talk about this with students, the first reaction is, oh, this can't be, old buildings are stiff, they cannot be changed, they are rigid, they are unflexible. But when you think about it, think about a old building, I mean, a really old building, not something from the 60s. It's a different cup of tea there. But if you think of an old building, very often the rooms had more than one functions. There was not this really diversified system of electric installations and heating. And so the rooms could be used and were often used with different functions. And this makes it usually much easier to reuse a historic building than a building that was built in the last 20, 30 years, where every room is exactly built for one purpose. So this is like, I think, an important message that we need to spread. Then we have the longevity of historic building materials and the repairability. Think about wooden windows, think about tiles on the roof, think about tiles on the pavement. When something is broken, you can just repair and take out one part of it. And many of modern materials are much harder to repair. And this is also an important aspect of heritage and resilience. Then we have the topic of adapted uses. So we have spaces in cities, for example, that have been used in various ways and still can be used. I mean, think of historic cities that were built for horse wagons. And today we see the electric cars driving on it, and we see the tramways, and it's still the same city. I mean, it's a kind of miracle that cities in a way are very adaptable, and even the historic cities. And then we have resilience factors in urban planning. So this is more related to finding a good balance in the planning approach about short-term flexibility and long-term stability, and also about closeness of urban functions. I mean, now everyone is talking about Paris and the 15-minute city. And in a way, this 15-minute city, hocus pocus, it is only a rediscovering of very old principles that we had in every historic city in Europe. I mean, historic cities have been cities of closeness. They were walkable. You, of course, had within 15 minutes 90% of the things you need. And now we're rediscovering this principle. Unfortunately, it is not labeled that it is a sort of rediscovering of historic principles, but it's now coming shiny new, and every mayor is dreaming of this 15-minute city. But in core, it's a heritage-related resilience quality that we are reintroducing and recreating in cities all around the world. So when we put resilience in urban planning and heritage management, we must balance long-term adaptability and short-term functions. What do I mean by this? I mean, especially after disasters, things are happening very quickly, but at the same time, we have to think far ahead. What can be the next change that is coming? And that is exactly what makes planning so difficult, and in many cities also going wrong in many, many cases. So we have this concept of the adaptive cycle that is used, for example, in the ARCH network. It has 4 phases: growth and exploitation, conservation, collapse, release, and renewal reorganization. We will see in a minute how they understand it. And how can we measure resilience also in urban planning? We can measure it by robustness. It's the ability to absorb disturbances. Here it says without losing identity. In the case of cities, I would add other dimension that we don't want to lose. It's not only identity. And then it's also about the recovery rate. How long do we take after a severe event, or for example, after COVID? How long did it take the cities? And in Europe, I've seen a number of studies where the cities were quite different in how long they took to get back on track after COVID. So there are some good indicators that we can take here to understand the resilience qualities. So this is a little bit looking at the timeline, at the process. So this is the adaptive cycle, and we have growth, we have conservation. It's also sometimes the conservation of growth. I mean, we're so used that things are always better, so we want to keep that. Then we have the impact of something, disaster, COVID, economic crisis. A lot of things can happen. And then we had the idea to go back to business as usual. This is like the gray line. And in the shelter project, they had the idea, and this is now taken up very much also by the European Commission and European documents, this term, I'm sure you heard it, of build back better. It's not enough to go back like it was. We want to be better, and better meaning more resilient here. So the ideas of resilience in shelter and arch, just to give you a brief idea. So in shelter, the idea was it's the ability of a historic urban or territorial system term here, and all its social, cultural, economic, environmental dimensions across temporal, process quality, and spatial scales to maintain or rapidly return to desired functions in the face of a disturbance, to adapt to change, and to use it for a systemic transformation, to still retain essentially the same function, structure, and feedbacks, and therefore identity, that is the capacity to adapt in order to maintain the same identity. So here they used identity as a sort of vehicle, as a core element of what they want to preserve. But it's not that the city needs to be exactly the same as it was before. It's more about the core identity. And in Arch, it has a similar definition. It says the sustainability of a historic area as a social system to cope with events while responding and adapting in socially just way, maintain the historic area's function and heritage. So it's here more the aspect about this responding quality. And we will see in a minute how these things are of different relevance in the different phases. So both projects provided like integrated approaches to urban heritage resilience. It's quite clear that both work with systems, both combine disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, and in circular reinforcing processes. And the key focus has been urban heritage, knowledge, but also aspects of society and practical solutions. So in the shelter framework, they followed a cyclical structure with 10 steps across 3 phases. And in the shelter process, they used a different program. So this is in the Arch project. They use this, this one, project management, this plan, do, act cycle. I'm personally not a big fan of it. Why? Because from the first few, it looks like when you go through the cycle, you end up where you started. And this is almost never true. So for me, it's a little bit oversimplified. But what you can see here, you have these different phases pre-disaster, where you can do things like prepare the ground, assess vulnerabilities, do the long-term planning, understand the relevant stakeholders, organize resources, etc. Then you have the disaster. It's the time of the firemen, the police, the catastrophe units, etc. The hospitals. Then you have the post-disaster phase, where still it's not a moment where you have time to do this long-term planning. And only to understand that these different phases are relevant is absolutely crucial to understand resilience. But I prefer much more the one from the shelter project, which is on the first few much more complicated, but we don't need to read everything on this slide. But look at this infinity sign. It's basically also using different phases. So it has the first phase, they call it the prevention phase, where you understand your risks, where you do your stakeholder mapping, where you communicate with the population and make them aware of the risks, etc., where you take political decisions. Then you have the preparedness phase. It would be the case that you have some early warning signs, for example, that there's a heat wave coming. Then you would be in the preparedness phase, where you do more urgent things that are sometimes related to life and death. Then you have the response wave in the case of the heat wave, maybe bringing water to the city or providing cool places for elderly people, whatever. And then you have this long phase, and I really like the term recovery and build back better. And it's not only recovering to reach the same level, but it's really to improve the resilience capacity. And to do this is a lot of effort. It needs a common understanding of the risks. It needs officers in urban realities that are more generalists and not so specialists, because it's easier when you're a generalist to understand a system than if you're a specialist. So these are the two concepts, and let me look. These are just some of the core elements and core principles. I mean, basically both do vulnerability and risk assessment before something is happening, and both work with the establishment of monitoring, evaluation, and both use revision and have this learning approach that after each disaster or event, or it can be even a long-term thing that is happening. It doesn't always be to have a rapid onset event, but the idea is that you always try to learn as much as you can and use your community as much as you can to understand what happens. And I think there's a lot of historical things to discuss, to discover also how communities dealt with disasters. And this is a field where there's not a lot of research has been done. For example, recently there was the idea to have a project along the river Danube and to work with the communities and to understand better how they dealt with floods, but purely from the community perspective. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn, because disasters are not new. They have always been there. We have them more increasingly, and they are more severe, but it's not something that is new to mankind. So both use an all hazards approach. And I think that's very important, that we don't focus on a specific hazard, but we embrace the complexity, that there are like a lot of different risks and hazards. They use data and local knowledge, and they have this strong element to promote collaboration between the different urban silos or sectors, or however you call them. And believe me, my day job is in a city, and this is the biggest challenge always, how to bridge the sectors. And they also emphasize social memory, early recovery plans, and some things that are more related to soft things. And it's not always about concrete and rebuilding and bringing in the really hardworking man. So they both provide tools to collect, analyze, and share information. I invite you to look at the website of both projects if you want to dive deeper. There are a lot of tools that you can use. That some of them are related to modeling, some of them are related to monitoring, and they also offer step-by-step instructions when you in your city want to start working on resilience following this approach. So tools are important, but personally, I think they are the second or third step. The first thing that we need to do is just to raise awareness and have a common understanding, get more of the terminology of disaster risk management and resilience in the urban heritage sector, because it's not there. And then when we have a common understanding, when we know what each other is doing, when we have an idea of the risks, then maybe there is a point where we can work with tools, but many people jump too quickly to the tools, and that often doesn't work. So we are getting closer to the end, and this is a table that I made because I have a lot of discussion with colleagues. I mean, what is the role of cultural heritage? And I think the role of cultural heritage is different in each phase related to resilience. So in the prevention phase, when the objective is avoid disaster and crisis, heritage often is more the context. So it's not about preservation, it's more giving context. In the preparedness phase, it's then we have the narrative that everyone knows. It's about protecting, where all the preservationists are very eager. Yes, we need to protect, protect, protect. Then we have the response phase, where we have the emergency reactions, and then heritage can also be a resource. Think of the shelter quality of historic buildings. Think of cool places when it's very hot, etc., etc. And then when it comes to recovery and build back better, increase the quality of life for local communities and increase the resilience capacity, then I think heritage also has this function of a resource, because we have a lot of traditional building techniques, traditional materials, traditional knowledge that we can rediscover to make our cities more resilient. It doesn't need always to be the German engineered high-tech solution. So urban heritage must both be protected, but also used as a resource. And it sounds very easy when I read it, but believe me, in the heritage sector, it's 95% the narrative of protection and 5% the narrative of using as a resource and discovering the resource quality. So we are at a momentum that we need to get the word out and look more at the resource qualities and adaptation qualities. Of course, resilience frameworks must be adapted to local conditions. This is a no-brainer here. I mean, when we talk about systems, every system is specific and it's individual, and we need, first of all, to understand it. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution for resilience and heritage. Local communities have an extremely important role, especially when we understand heritage as a system, because all the heritage is about the people, basically. So we must start with the people and not with the buildings. The shelter framework is effective but complex, and I think it's a good way to get an understanding with these 4 phases and also communicate it. Tools and methods must be adaptable but also compatible. Not every tool works everywhere. Think of high-tech tools, GIS, mapping, drones, whatever. I mean, they don't work in every condition, and it's also a matter of resources, capacity of people, etc. Training, education, and governance adjustments are necessary to equip the stakeholders with the right skills. I remember when I was in Toronto, I saw these posters at the bus stop educating the house owners what they can do to preserve their building when a flood is coming or heavy rainfall comes. And I use this example in many, many cases, because in Europe, we are far from this approach that we need to educate the normal people about this in a direct way. So I found this a very good example from Toronto. And while tested in Europe, of course, these frameworks can and should be expanded globally. This is why we work with UNESCO, ICOMOS, ICROM, and a lot of things are going on. Not everything is maybe easy to understand and targeted on the right level, but it's good that the topic is somehow coming up. So basically, I'm ready with my publication, with my presentation, but I wanted to give you 2 ideas. If you want to write and publish with us, we have one MDPI opportunity. It's called World Heritage Sites and Values in Danger. It's a climate change related challenges and transformation. It's a topic collection. So you can publish in different journals like Heritage, Sustainability, Land, and MDPI, and still belong to this section. You will find all information on MDPI website. And the second one, it's a special issue of Land, and there the topic is cultural heritage preservation as a basis for sustainable development and transformation of historic urban landscapes. So if you have anything to contribute, I'm more than happy to have you on board here. You will find all information on the link provided. And last but not least, these are the 2 main references that I've used. So the first one, it's called Urban Heritage Resilience, an integrated and operationable definition from the Shelter and Arch projects, published just last November, I think. And the other one is from 2014. It's more understanding what at the core can heritage contribute to resilience. So That's it from my point of view. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to our exchange and discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ripp. Thank you for this very interesting and problematic contribution about the question of the resilience. You started from the meaning in 15th century when resilience was only a juridical term, and then going back or going ahead to the 19th century when the concept was connected to the physical durability, thanks to the psychology, to the biology, food, and soil, and so on. I'm sorry, I was taking some notes of your presentation. Of course, as an archaeologist, I'm very much interested to your conference, to your basic concept. I know very well that the management of cultural heritage in ancient city or in archaeological sites is a very, how can I say, hopeless. um, Try to help and to avoid some disaster or something like that. You know, I'm living in a very complicated geological territorial area, which is Napoli, very close to Vesuvio volcano, and also to Campi Flegrei, which is in near Pozzuoli. And in the last months, in the last year, we had about 100 earthquake. I don't know the English name for the when the soil is moving anyway, not very strong, fortunately, but more than 100. So I was very impressive for some concept. Of course, I don't have any specific question to you because I'm not an expert, but I wanted just to emphasize some concepts you have mentioned, because of course you are coming from Ratisbona, and Ratisbona also was an historical city, probably not so earlier than Napoli, but anyway, founded by the Roman Empire. And the concept you are mentioning about we are working for people and for stone. And also you mentioned for the people and not for the buildings, which I accept, of course. I'm not so stupid archaeologist that put ahead the archaeological remains to the living people anyway. But how this contradiction can be solved, especially in a city like where we are living, which are very exposed to disaster, especially earthquakes and so on. This is the main point. But there was also very interesting concept you were talking about in the historical districts, the combination of the mediation between the short-term flexibility and long-term stability. Also, this looks like very contradictory from one point of view, because our life is a short-term life. So 70, 80 years old or something like is not the eternity anyway. And third point, which is very, very much interested, the pre-disaster and post-disaster, because generally the human beings understand everything after the disaster, because we're unstable, because the scientific technology is not enough for prevent earthquakes or something, eruption or something like that. So all these apparently contradiction can find, in your opinion, a kind of human mediation, because otherwise every risk to become much higher, if I understand well what you mentioned. please.
Yes, I think it's absolutely. You're supporting my argument. I mean, the thing is that when it comes to disaster risk management, I mean, when you, for example, think of Blue Shield organization, where
Yeah.
you know the people sitting in the fighter plane have a map and the historic monuments are marked in the map. Okay, so we have discussions like where's the bomb falling when it doesn't fall on the church? Okay, maybe it's falling on the school. Maybe
Yes,
maybe it's better to have it falling on the church. Huh? So
that's right.
we have a lot of moral things to discuss also here. But I like to come from the other side and basically say we have to put people at the center of the things we do, even in heritage management. And you archaeologist, my wife is an archaeologist. You have always been dealing with systems, you know, because the way you approach an archaeological site, you have systemic thinking. You look at the artifact, but you try to understand what has it been used, where does it come from, where's the material. You had this systemic thinking. Unfortunately, not many archaeologists label it in that way. You know, I
I
wish
understand.
for more support from the archaeologists to tell the story that we need to understand heritage as a system, because archaeology is a fantastic example. When it comes to all the debates and conflicts that we have in climate adaptation, think, for example, of in Central Europe, we have a lot of discussion, can we have more green in the historic cities? And then we have preservationists that say, no, it was in this building, there was never a tree and we cannot put any trees. I mean, we have to take moral decisions at one point, and these decisions are about people. They're not about stones.
Good.
And I think we have reached a momentum where the way we do heritage preservation, like we have done it in the last 40, 50 years, has somehow reached an end. Because the challenges and the pressure and also the disasters, the impact has become so severe that we need to rethink. And I see a lot of signs that we do rethink. But of course, we have also very old heritage concepts, like, for example, in UNESCO, the definition used in the World Heritage Convention. I mean, it's basically from the 1960s. So
Yeah.
I think what we need is we need to have more contemporary understandings and models, first of all, for cultural heritage, and then for all the things we do with cultural heritage. And resilience, in a way, helps us because it brings this systems quality to the table, and it fits well with cultural heritage if we understand it as a system. So maybe use it like that. And to bridge the barriers, I mean, what do we need? We need in the education of preservationists, of architects, we need a lot of things that have something to do with empathy, with soft skills, understand what the other people are doing, you know, the idea that I can do something else before I start a job to get a broader understanding and have more a zigzag way of life than a straight line. You know, I think we can do a lot, but in many curricula, it's still very much subject, and it's still pretty narrow. So, but
Yeah.
I see shifts. I see shifts.
Okay, there will be a lot of other things to discuss, but I wanted to give the words to the session. I see.
Mhm.
You can read the question
Yes, yes, yes. I
of
can read the
Bavaria
question.
Kerkiak, please.
Shall I start with the one in the question and answers? Huh? Yes.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
there is a
The
from
long-term
Bavaria
planning. Yeah.
Kerkiak.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is something that goes beyond heritage and resilience, but you know, the way we do urban planning and we do like urban development plans, for example, in Central Europe, you still find many that have a time dimension of 20 years ahead. Okay. I mean, it is okay to have a vision for 20 years ahead. I have nothing against long-term visions, but this very German idea of we always start with the objective and then we make the objective in 20, 25 years. And then we define everything towards this objective and just follow it. I mean, this is over. We need flexibility in urban planning, but this is a big problem for local governments because the way guys like me are hired, we have lifetime contracts. The idea is you do the same thing from day one to your last day. I mean, it's hitting a very rigid system, but I think we need more flexible things. And what do I mean by flexible things? I mean things like urban acupuncture, for example, like urban experiments. We try something, maybe for a week, maybe for half a year, and then we look how it works, and then we can formalize it. And cities like Naples, I mean, they had so many informal things that were not planned. We just need to rediscover. But it's also a very specific German issue that we think we need to have 100% specific idea before we do something. And I think this is not the right mindset today. We need a more playful, experimental approach. And at the same time, of course, we need to have these long-term visions. In urban planning, I'm a big fan of the ones that have been presented in the European Leipzig Charter 2, which is basically the just city, the sustainable city, and what is the third one? I think it is the social city. So this is a good umbrella for a vision. So, but we need both. And usually cities don't have a problem with the long term, but they have a problem with the short term.
Okay, let's see if there is any other question.
Yeah, I see it in the chat a few.
Sorry, I
Oh.
just wanted to jump in really quickly as
Yeah.
so other people in the webinar can't see what the questions are in the Q&A, and also just for posterity's sake, for when people are watching the recording, if we could please just read the questions out loud as well, just so that people have all of the context.
Okay.
Please. Thank
Shall
you.
I start with those in the chat, maybe? There are a few in the chat. Shall I just start reading them?
Sure, or I'm happy to read them out as well,
Oh, yeah.
or Dr.
Yeah.
Chen. Yeah, so okay, so I can read them out and then you can
Yeah, great.
yeah. Okay, so the next question comes from Tanya, who asks, or who says,
Chaturvedi Vergan. Yes, yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
thank you. So they ask, when we talk about transport heritage like maritime or railway that face recurrent disasters, extreme deterioration, rapid technology change, then how important is it to retain physical, tangible elements of heritage? Is it okay to make the ship of thesis changing every element, yet call it heritage?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, the basic question is, when is something still original? If we change, how many % of things can we change of a house, for example, that we still original? And it's of course the same for, I mean, you call transport heritage or railway. For me, I call them linear representation of heritage systems, okay? Because, for example, a historic railway system is a system and it has many, many elements, and it's only we perceive it as linear. But I would not call them linear heritage, because there is a tendency in ICOMOS to open up a new idea of linear heritage. I don't like it. It's systems with linear representations. And the same is true like for a house. I think maybe when you think of a city, think of Toronto. And think of coming back to Toronto after 20 years. And probably, maybe, I don't know, 5% of the buildings have changed and they have a new subway system and new streets and new colors of the houses, new people, and well, I don't know, maybe much more older people. And do you still have the feeling it's the same city? Probably yes, because it is more about what you perceive, and this is more to do with your sense of belonging and more with soft qualities and not so much with the hard facts. And for in ancient cathedrals in Europe, I mean, they have been constantly worked on for 500 years. So basically, when you look at the cathedral now, I would estimate it's maybe 60% original, but 40% has been currently renewed over the last 500 years. So I think this renewal, and we have to understand that it's also part of heritage. It's part of this reparation, and it also has to do something with resilience. So I think it's a normal thing, and we can be a little bit flexible.
Yeah, there is another one. Alia Fares. You can read it.
Yeah, I'll read it out. Yeah, so Alia asks, well, it says, starts off with very powerful statement about focusing on the human heritage element versus stone heritage. But then again, it does take courage to change that, especially in post-colonial cities, which are still trying to fight their way through to become completely independent of their colonial past in order to view their own heritage with pride rather than shame. So not really a question, but I wonder if you have anything to comment on that as well.
Well, in heritage, we have a lot of discussions about this Euro-centralized approach of all heritage. We have a lot of discussion in UNESCO, and we are very aware that the concept, the model that we use of heritage, for example, in UNESCO and the World Heritage Convention, is purely European-minded, and it doesn't work in many, many areas of the world. And it can be called colonial, it can be called Eurocentric, whatever. And there are a lot of things going on to change it, but I think we are in the very early stages of understanding how central to the whole heritage idea this Eurocentric core really is. And I understand that in some cities where you have this colonial dimension, you have different issues. It comes to stakeholders, minorities, etc., and it's probably more complicated. But also in Europe, we have a lot of discussions about this decolonialization of heritage. There's a good article by Weber and Doro, the former president of ICROM. It's called The Desecularization of Heritage. It's a fantastic read because at the same time with this Eurocentrism, we also made heritage like a sacred, untouchable, because it's like made from Europe, which is supposed to be the center of culture in the world. And this, of course, totally outdated misunderstanding and does in no way reflect, for example, my heritage approach.
I don't know if there is anything else.
Well, just being mindful that we are a little over time, but if there is one more question I see in the chat, if you do have the time.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So this last question here comes from Konstantinotos Chatsiandro. Sorry if I mispronounced that. But they ask, just as urban planning and public administration often leave contradictions underexplored, how can we address similar tensions in the heritage sector? For example, when installing flood barriers in Hanseatic cities or introducing more greenery to stone-dominated historic centers like Catania.
Very good point, and very much in the discussion that we had in the last 5 years all over Europe. I mean, what I learned also in my role as a coach working with people, that we as humans, we shy away from conflicts, okay? We don't want to have conflicts. We want to have harmony. We want to balance. We want to bridge. But conflicts are normal part of life, okay? And especially when things are changing, when we have transformation processes, conflicts are totally normal. And this is what we see now with climate change and cultural heritage. So the first thing is to embrace the conflict and see what we can learn from the conflict. And what we did, for example, we had a project with 3 German cities last year with the city of Augsburg, and Hamburg was even part of the project, in Regensburg. And we had 3 public discussions about these conflicts. And in Regensburg, the topic was bringing more green to the stone city. And in Hamburg, it was about water management, exactly what you say about the flood barriers. So we had these conflicts out in the open, and they were pretty harsh sometimes. And then we analyzed the conflicts, like we recorded them, we made a transcript, and then we analyzed by grounded theory, because I wanted to understand what are the values behind the people who are having this conflict in front of me, because it doesn't help to always talk about the single tree or the specific flood barrier. It's too specific. I wanted to understand what's going on the abstract value, and a wonderful thing came out. my hypothesis was, I'm sure we find a lot of conflicts and conflicting values, but we didn't. We found out that the people that had the conflict about the tree in the historic place and the preservationist on the abstract level, they were following the same values. And it was the value of, like, you can call it saving nature or saving earth, and it's just different representations. So I learned that when we take the effort to understand what values are behind the conflicts, there is a way to bridge, but we need to take the effort to go more deeper and on a more abstract level, because otherwise we will only have the people who find about the very specific thing. And that needs a lot of training. You need to be an excellent facilitator. You need to have a broad view and understanding. You need to know yourself that you're not triggered when there's a conflict. So it's quite advanced what you need to bring to the table to really embrace these conflicts and enable solutions. And it's hard to find people with these qualities and at the same time good qualities in urban planning or preservation. It's usually separated.
I think there is not any other. I don't
Cecile.
see. Oh no, there is
Cecile.
maybe
Yeah.
another one.
Thank you very much. I know we're over time, but I couldn't resist. So lot to discuss, but as you towards the end and actually throughout the presentation, which was great, you've said that we need to start with the people and not the buildings. And I must admit that I personally struggle to relate to the concept of heritage resilience. So rather, in my work, I focus more on the role of heritage in community resilience. And I think as we start to become more familiar and make use of this concept of resilience in our work, we will also understand that the nuances matters. Like, for instance, in tourism, it's actually the use of resilience. It's much used, but it's a big difference to talk about resilience of an industry and the resilience of a tourism-dependent community. And I think, I believe that would also be the case in other parts of our domain. And secondly, in your presentation, you spoke about the resilience capacity, but other definitions also see resilience as a number of capacities. It's the absorptive, it's the adaptive, and the transformative capacity. So maybe you could say something more about these various forms of capacities that you have seen in your work.
Yeah. So to the first question, it's more a question related to how do we understand the system and where do we draw the borders of the system? I mean, in system theory, John Peter van Giesch, for example, when you look at systems, it's interesting at the borders, because borders of systems are usually not borders, but they are fluid, and there it's very interesting. So the question is always, what do we understand as an entity or whatever, and what do we understand as their surroundings? And the examples you gave, of course, it's totally different when you look at a tourism company or the tourism sector or local communities, because you're looking at you have a different focus of different parts, or you can call them subsystems. So, I mean, this is maybe the biggest way to manipulate systemic approaches. And also, I perceive it's the biggest way to manipulate the whole sustainability discussion in tourism at the moment, because who hasn't been to this conference in Australia where they present you on the last day about their fantastic green score and you have 300 people in the room that fly all over the world, but the paper cup for the coffee was so well sustainable. I mean, it's quite obvious. This is the way to manipulate, and this is also the way where to focus. So this is true and we cannot change it. We can only be open, and we must acknowledge that this is happening. And you always find connections between the different subsystems. So this for me is no surprise. And with the different capacities to adapt, it's a little bit going in the same direction. It depends, first of all, what do you understand? What are you looking at? What is your definition? What is your part of the world that you're examining, and that you identify different parts of it? And then you have different capacities, you have different resources, you also have different processes. It's a total natural way. I didn't mean to give any standardized recipe here. I just wanted to stimulate the idea to dig a little bit deeper into the term resilience. And if we call it heritage resilience or community resilience, where heritage contributes, it's just a way of looking at different things. I mean, for me, the paradigm shift is that up till now, 95% of literature is only telling the story of we need to preserve the physical heritage, okay? And when we talk about the resilience, it's all about how good we manage after a disaster that the physical heritage is the same as before. And this is a total limitation. It's too narrow, it's too linear, and it's not embracing a lot of other qualities. And I think here is the paradigm shift, that we understand the different roles. And of course, the roles not only of heritage is changing, also the roles of us, of the experts, is changing, the role of the communities is changing, the role of the decision makers is changing. Everything is changing wherever we look. The thing is, to make it a little bit digestible for people, we need to have this smaller view where we look at, because a lot of people are overwhelmed when we confront them with the whole complexity of the system, like with a full historic urban landscape. People shy away. They say, oh, I will never understand, you know? And this is why we have the tendency also in academia, we have the tendency to find a small field and be the king of a small field and know it very well. But when it comes to other things, we either say, oh no, this is not my field, okay? So that's why I think we need more generalists. We need UN sustainability science, for example. They do a lot of these general science, and it's like a counter movement. I mean, with the Bologna process at the universities, we have this super specialization, and I think we also need in academia the opposite direction. I encourage my students to be broad and to do weird things they really like, because this will help them later.
I think there is another message if we have time, Francesco.
Yeah.
You can read this one. When we talk about transport heritage like maritime or railway that face recurrent disaster, extreme deterioration, rapid technology change, then how important is to retain physical tangible elements of heritage? Is it okay to make the ship of this changing every element you call it heritage?
I think we already had that question before. So I basically said that it's a matter of definition, how much original substance needs to be there that we can still perceive it. And we have the whole discussion of authenticity, the NARA document of authenticity, where there has been a huge number of conferences to define about this originality. I personally think NARA document and all this discussion, it was a misguided way, because it was only putting the physical fabric on a higher altar, making it even more important, you know. And I think in a way we need to embrace that it's more about perception, it's more about how we feel, it's more about what we perceive of heritage. This is maybe more important to define the point when we think something has changed so much that it's not the original anymore, or it is still acceptable.
I think there are some other more very powerful statement about focusing on the human heritage element versus stone heritage. But then again, it does take courage. Sorry.
I think we've answered that one as well.
We did already?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was all of the questions in the chat.
Yes, Catania, we did already. Okay. I have only one comments, but not
Yeah,
question.
okay.
No,
Yes.
but not question. What we can do if the Pompeian people did not build their own stone building, or telling the truth, bricks building, and they did not go to their own churches, so the temples. We could not do anything.
Yeah.
I know that
Yeah.
this is a comparison is a provocative, but
No,
yeah,
you're absolutely true. But the question is more, and you know this as an archaeologist. I mean, what was the motivation? Why did they build
yeah,
it?
yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is, I mean, they needed shelter, they needed worship, they needed food, they needed social connection,
Everything.
whatever.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
this is
yeah.
interesting to understand. This part of the heritage system is so interesting to understand the role for the communities. And there's
Yes.
little research on how does cultural heritage contribute to human connection, to well-being, to psychological health, all these sort of things. It's all only emerging. And I think this is also, I mean, in COVID, wasn't it fantastic that the people rediscovered the historic parks in the cities that before were somehow neglected? And from one day to the other, everyone loved these historic parks. And sometimes the appreciation, you can still feel it today. So,
Yeah.
but it was a different function.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we have finished. We thank very much Dr. Ripp, and I do hope very much we can meet again once, or
Yes.
in visual context, or in human context anyway. And so I give the word to Francesco. Maybe you wanted to make a conclusion or something like. Thank you to Dr. Ripp and to everybody, the participant, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to quickly as well thank everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Ripp, for that great presentation and the great Q&A. And thank you for staying a little over time with us to get through all of the questions. Thank you, of course, to you, Dr. Jenny Phil, as well, for moderating the session and for being here today. Thank you to Kurosh for helping us organize the whole series and organize this session as well. And thank you, Cecily, and thanks to Catherine for sponsoring or partnering with us for this series through World Heritage Catalysis and through Heritage Ottawa. And then just one big final thanks to our audience for taking the time to be here, interacting, talking, asking questions. That's what makes this series and all of our series worthwhile, to have that interaction and to be able to talk with you all about these important things. So yeah, just with that, thank you so much. Just two quick reminders to our audience out there. This is a monthly speaker series, so we will be having another session in May, first Monday of each month. So I believe that's May 5th. And then this session is also being recorded so that you can review it and revisit it on YouTube. And also please feel free to share it with your networks and anyone who might not have been able to join us today. And so with that, thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thank you to you.
Yeah. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a
It was
lot.
fantastic.
See you.
Lively discussion. Thank you so much.
See you.
And
See you. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.
I write you, Cecile.